call this Jamestown Public School Board meeting to order. This is a regular meeting. We first met at 4 p.m. on a facility tour. We started out the Career and Technology Center and then completed the tour at the high school. Thank you to Jerome Wagner, Darby Heinert, and Principal Adam Gaylor for showing us around those schools, some of the needs, some of the things that were great things that are happening at those schools. So thank you. It is November 21st, 2022 at 5:15 p.m. And due to the tour, we are located at the media center of the high school for this board meeting, since it was close proximity. I'd like to recognize all those in the audience. Thank you for coming tonight. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, and the flag is over in that direction. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Gail, would you be willing to read the school board norms?
The board developed norms are to share and respect varied opinions and speak with a united voice once a decision has been reached, to prudently prioritize resources in a student-centric manner that aligns with the district's strategic plan, to exhibit a mindset of continuous improvement through adequate preparation for meetings and a commitment to board education, to commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high-quality governance for the staff, students, and community of Jamestown.
Thank you again. There's no public communication for tonight. Are there any conflicts of interest? Are there any conflicts of interest? Are there any conflicts of interest? No conflicts of interest. Moving on to our consent agenda. At any time, a board member would like to remove something from the consent agenda to have further discussion or more information on, they can do so at any time. Just let me know. It does not need a motion. Is there anything you'd like to remove, Aaron?
Yeah, I'd like to take the annual report out for discussion.
The annual report? Okay. All right. And so we'll move forward with approving the consent agenda without the annual report, and we'll place that in other, under E. So we'll approve A through D. Anything else the board would like to remove? Anything else the board would like to remove? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda A through D? Motion by Diane, second by Steve. Is there any discussion? We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda A through D. There being no discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Number E, other. The 2021 to 2022 superintendent's annual report. Aaron, did you have some questions on that? And Dr. Leck, feel free to comment on those.
Okay, sure.
Or if you want to give a review of it first, you certainly can.
No, that's fine.
So go ahead.
Yeah, so there's just a couple of items I wanted, just primarily for discussion, and then also for my own education on the purpose of this report. But just looking at the report, there's a couple of things that jumped out at me that I'd like to have the board consider for future topics and maybe direction. One is the scope and breadth of the curriculum that we have within our district. This report kind of just, gathers all that and summarizes it very well. And when you look at it, we have a lot of stuff going on within our district. And I would just like us to look at that and, is this the most cost effective? Is this the most beneficial use of money for our students and getting the bang for our buck? With all the academics that are in there. Some of us, and just conversing with Dr. Leck, is, we're going above and beyond state standards with a lot of this stuff, giving opportunities to the students, which we all recognize, but then at what value? So I think it was just, if we just challenge ourselves and just question, is this right? Is this the right position for where we want to be as a district? That's one item. The other is just with the analysis of the state assessment. There's a lot of data in there, and then as far as a comparison or assessment of that analysis, there's not a whole lot of information. What does this mean? So we're presented the data, we're given proficiency information, there's this comparison to the state, but what does that mean? And then is that where we want to be as a district? Should we be holding ourselves to a higher standard for where we're at? Are there any differences within the different schools that we can build on and learn off of as far as like best practices or, and apply across the district? So just some things there in terms of a more objective analysis, I think would be helpful for the district and for the board to have a better understanding of, of the data that's in the report. And then lastly, it was just as a role, we of the board in approving this report, what standards are we held to as a board for our approval? And again, I contacted Dr. Leck on that, and it's a century code requirement, but as far as the actual content of the report is fairly, there's some latitude there. So if we want to see something different within the report, I guess it's up to the school board to help define that. So I appreciate that input from Dr. Leck on that. So those are the kind of just the topics I wanted to raise, and if there was any other discussion from input from the board.
Gail.
I can usually project pretty good too, but is it on?
No, it's just through the system. There
So
isn't
we're
any
good?
amplification here, yep.
Yeah, okay. I would say that some of what Aaron brought up is appropriate, but I would like to make sure that as a board would look at that we are also seeking input from those teachers who are teaching those classes and making those decisions in those departments, and give them a chance to explain why they are taught or what their opinions are, what benefits the students they teach are having them. Sometimes on paper, one thing looks a different way than when we hear back from maybe even students who are in some of those courses and what they're gaining from it. I also would like to state, to me, this report isn't necessarily a vision, it's more what is, if I'm correct. This states what was. So as we move and look at our long-term plan, maybe those items could be a part of that discussion. But I would like to make sure that we are involving those stakeholders and those teachers who are in that program.
Diane.
Public to know that in this report, Aaron referred to it, but when it comes to state assessment, Jamestown Public School District stands above and beyond, and every single category with the exception of one, we exceeded the state assessment standards. So I just want to say that that's what jumped out at me, and I think it's a good idea to learn more about what does that mean. And I think there's no doubt that we want to continue with that trend, but it looks very, very good in the data to see that percentage so nicely. Thank you.
Dr. Leck.
That would draw attention. So for those interested, this is, as Mr. Roberts said, it's a requirement through North Dakota Century Code, and it's, if you're curious to look it up, it's a very short piece of Century Code, but it's 15.1-09-35. That's reports by school boards on conditions of schools, and actually the requirement is pretty vague. The requirement in Century Code, it is a requirement for schools to report on the condition of all schools in the district, including their financial condition and educational progress of students enrolled in each school. That is historically, this annual superintendent's report is historically how this district has answered that question or fulfilled that responsibility. A number of schools across North Dakota don't provide a separate report. They consider that as part of other reporting measures that they conduct, so it's not a separate report. We have felt, superintendents before me and myself included, as long as it's in the Century Code and says your school districts need to provide a report, we do exactly what Century Code says. Rather than saying, well, we cover that in other ways. We just provide the report because that's what Century Code tells us is our responsibility. And schools do that a lot of different ways, but that's how we choose to do it. We consider it as kind of a state of the district report. As Ms. Nelson had said, the year that was, kind of. In terms of course requirements, that's outlined specifically in 15.1-21-02. That's required units of study. That's what we require. the state requires us for units of study. Every school goes far and above what the required units are. The state allows for, local control to decide what does a school district want to teach outside of these requirements. And if I hear Mr. Roberts correctly, it's, well, let's just do an assessment. Let's look at what we are offering. Are they the right assessments? Are they the right units of study? Are they the right courses? Are they cost effective, but also are they meeting their needs in terms of students, staff? Are they the right classes that we're offering, given that we'd love to offer everything, but we can't do that? And at what point do we need to continue to have conversations around what the course of units that we offer? Now how that works is we have a very thick course book, and students will express their interest in what is offered. And then we use Power Scheduler to help us determine how can we meet the needs of the most students. And I'm sure I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it's somewhere usually in the low 90s, low 90%. Okay, so they get it about to a point where in the low 90s, to the students' interest to making a schedule that works for them. And so that's a pretty good clip. But as I hear the concern, let's continue to have a conversation about what we're offering, and is it effective, what we're using, what we're doing? Is it the best manner to do that? And there's a lot of different ways you can look to engage in this conversation. That could be anything from looking at how we schedule, how many, if we, trimesters, for example, looking away from a typical fall semester, spring semester into trimesters. You could offer more classes and provide fewer preps at the same time. So I think there's a lot of different ways we can engage in the conversation, but essentially that's how it works now. It starts with student interest. The last piece is that I wanted to comment on relates to the assessment results and the reporting. To me, this connects with a conversation the board is already engaged in, and that's how we progress monitor results at the strategic level, and how are we reporting. And this is, what we do is very transparent, but it doesn't, to Mr. Roberts' point, drill down. It doesn't drill down very well to a building level. It gives district-wide data. And what does that mean? What kind of goals are we setting for ourselves rather than just comparing ourselves to the state? Do we have other progress monitoring measures that we want to engage and have and push ourselves towards? All great questions. I think those are for strategic plans and for a greater conversation. But I think it's the direction I've been hearing the board wants to go in anyway with the strategic plan, and that just reconnects in my mind to that earlier conversation that how we report on assessments and what we're doing with that assessment data, and what does that tell us about what's working well, what can be done better.
Thank you, Dr. Leck. Any other? Steve?
I don't know if this is adding or not, but in terms of the percentages and what we're looking at for assessments, the District School Improvement Committee does a lot more digging on that, I think, and maybe it's something for retreat or something like that, but it is being done. It's just not reported in here, I don't think.
Correct. And, I look at it, as a district, I've been working a lot with Fargo Public Schools and Bismarck Public Schools to gather how they do it. I think in terms of our state, they do it the best in terms of how they connect assessments to their strategic plan. And so I want to dig a little bit deeper. I just had a conversation with Dr. Gandhi and Dr. Hornbacher this morning regarding what they do. I want to get a real sense of how they do it and to see how that might work for us. But if you want to check out what those two districts do, I think they do it the best.
Yeah.
And if we did drill down building by building, classroom by classroom, I'd also want us to be very mindful of the different challenges that different buildings have, and do it in a way that would be respectful and not
Sure.
a way that would be demeaning in any
course.
way to our staff or to our students or families.
Yeah.
Because I think you can get in some pretty dangerous territory when you start driving down data, can get pretty threatening to a lot of people, and do it in a spirit of hopefully bettering, not shaming.
Sure. Agree.
Dan?
You brought up the District School Improvement Committee, and I thought that's a great, this report did a great job in 74 pages of really kind of giving all the hooks of the various facets of the school. So I guess, do we have a report on the District School Improvement Committee that we could use when we get into the strategic planning, and what stuff you've looked at versus the various other committees that support this?
So what I would want to do there is I'd kind of start with the end in mind of what is it that the board wants, is interested to see, and then look to see how we could gather that data and report it in a way that would be beneficial to that. What specifically the School Improvement Committee might do, look at some data, but I'm not sure if it would be to the report level that what I would think would tie to the strategic plan. But I'd like to just dig into that a little bit more. All good, I think all good questions, and if I could just add one more thing. I just want to give Mr. Tweeten referenced the 74 pages. A lot of work goes in from our central office, and I do want to recognize those staff that do. It's called the Superintendent's Annual Report, but I write the foreword. Other people do a lot of the work that go along with this report. They do a great job. It's very transparent. It's a lot of information. And to the point I made earlier, most districts have, a couple of pages, and this is providing a lot more information. I think when you partner this with the 3 to 5 year long range plan, there's a lot of data that is made available to patrons in our community. And I certainly think that we can do this better. I don't mean that we couldn't do it better, but I think I want to recognize the work that does go into what they do.
So we've approved the consent agenda A through D. So I'm looking for a motion to approve E other, number 1, 2021 to 2022 Superintendent's Annual Report. Motion by Gail, second by Dan. Any further discussion on this? And then, Dr. Luck, this is also linked on our web page also, right? Or on our web page, the annual report?
We have paper copies available.
Paper copies there.
If they want.
If
I'm
someone
not
would
sure
like
if it is on the website or not.
Okay, or
Through the agenda.
through the
it would
agenda,
be.
yep, thank you. Yep. Any other discussion? Discussion? Good.
I noticed that we don't use consistent language for our school counselors. They're often referred to as guidance counselors, which is an archaic thing, so if that could be updated to school counselors, so it's uniform. Some have them just counselors. That would probably be a little more accurate, and it would make them really happy.
We can just, that doesn't change anything in the report, so we can update that. So,
From a finance perspective, you're looking at, you're looking at it from a different perspective, and also it's a concise report of a lot of information and historical. One place to go for a complete history of things. So,
thank you, Sally. So we have a motion and second. Is there any other discussion on approval of E other, number 1, 2021 to 2022 Superintendent's Annual Report? If there's no other discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Moving on to our regular meeting. A, we don't have any recognition tonight. B, we have not received any correspondence. C, under reports, thank you for being patient. Please come forward and state your name and give us the student council report.
Hello, I'm Will Nelson. I'm the Executive Student Council President of the Jamestown High School Student Council. Happy to be invited to give my monthly report here. Compared to last month, we had a very busy month with the Jamestown High School Student Council. We started out on November 8th with it's a brand new initiative. To my knowledge, it hasn't been done before, but we created JHS Votes is what we called it. And just to make sure that it was completely legal, first we got in contact with the Secretary of State's office, the election specialist, I think her name is Leanne Oliver, and we were consistent with election laws with this initiative, just to make sure we're clear in a time when those clarifications need to be made. But we provided a bus ride to any of our students who wanted to vote during period 3 on election day. And Fortunately, we provided 12 students in the end with the opportunity to vote, and we saw quite a few students at the polling place who were voting because they didn't have class at that time. We put a lot of posters up and put stuff out on social media, just trying to encourage students to make their voice heard, a lot of civic engagement. We thought that was important. Many of them didn't know what they needed to do to vote. We just told them they needed to take an ID with a street address, and we didn't encourage them to vote for any candidate or on any issue. We just really wanted to provide these young people with the chance to vote and to know that that's their right. So we started off the month doing that. That was just a little under 2 weeks ago. And last week, we had a very busy week. We did the Feeding Families food drive all last week at every school in the district. We did it up here at the high school, at the middle school, and then at all 5 elementaries. And we organized that via the JHS Student Council, but we left how they wanted to incentivize that to each school individually. So it's usually run by the social studies department here at the high school. If you bring a certain amount of items, you might get extra credit. At the schools, elementary schools specifically, I know that some of them did like a pizza party, or they brought donuts for the class that brought the most amount of items. So we had really good participation with that. That ended on Friday, and I think our 2 schools that brought the most items were Lincoln and the high school. We didn't get an exact count at the high school, but we had 3 carloads from the high school, mid-size SUVs, and we estimate over 2,000 items. Lincoln had an exact count. They had 1,372 items, and they were very proud of that. And in total, we had a total of 11 carloads that we took down to the Salvation Army Food Bank. And we thought that was really important. We read last month that they ran completely out of food. And I know that other members of the community and other organizations have tried to provide them with food, but we thought, you know, if we have the full reach of the Jamestown Public School District, why not take advantage of that and help our families in need? So we were very pleased with the outcome there. And also last Wednesday, every year we hold 2 blood drives, and we have Vitalent do that. And we held a blood drive last Wednesday, and they only asked that we provided 32 donors, but we had well and above more people volunteer to give blood, and I think we had over 40 people give blood, if I'm correct. They'll get those numbers back to us later on, and I can provide that in my December report. But we were very pleased with that because after the pandemic, they have such a shortage of blood, and that's something that's very much needed. So up to that point, that's about all we've done, but we've had a very busy last 3 weeks. If you have any questions, I'd be willing to take those.
Thank you, Will. Any questions for Will? Thank you very much. We really appreciate these reports and hearing what the students are up to. So thank you so much. Moving on, D, Board Education. Number 1, Educational Competency, Search and Seizures, Adam Gaylor and the SRO, Scott Giesler. And I think this is now in your drive, so you can pull that up from there. Or we have a screen over here too. I was wondering how that was going to work. Very good.
So while I'm getting this set up, we'll do just quick introductions. So I'm Adam Gaylor, Principal, Jamestown High School. Thank you guys for inviting me here to talk about this. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Officer Scott Giesler, who is our SRO and started with us this year and been a great addition to our staff. Scott, maybe you want to talk a little bit about your background while I get this set up.
Hi, everyone. Scott Giesler. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in Jamestown. Went to college in Jamestown, and I worked my first police officer job in Jamestown, started in 2007. From 2007 to 2011. In 2011, my wife and I decided we wanted to try bigger and better things. I moved out to the Seattle area. I was a police officer out there for about 11 years, just shy of 11 years. And we decided that Jamestown was a better place to be for us and our family. Moved back in November of last year and started November 16th. And been here, well, a year and 5 days. And then I started the SRO position at the beginning of the school year this year.
So,
We're very happy to have you.
yeah. So our goal with our presentation today is just to kind of overview some of the policy that's in place and talk about what that looks like in practice when it comes to searches of students, students' property, any property really on school campus, use of trained dogs, any overlap between that process and our school resource officer, or in some cases, whoever shows up from dispatch, or outside authorities approaching us, and then just a quick comparison of law enforcement and administrative limitations when it comes to that, and then to answer any questions you might have. Some of the things that we'll gloss over at a high level, and that's just to keep our processes unknown in some ways, and some of them we'll be able to go into greater detail. So when it comes to searching students, their property, patrons, their property, things like that in school, we have specific policy that is dedicated to that. And the litmus test for us as administrators is different than the litmus test for an officer to do that. So what we call, or what is described in policy is what's called reasonable suspicion, or reasonable and particularized suspicion. There's a few categories within that. If it's known to us or described to us that there's any concealment of any illegal substance or any substance that might violate, or equipment or weapons that might violate school policy, school rules, policy, violations of the law, anything that we're aware of that you can visibly see or someone else saw that is being concealed, any knowledge of that, any of that would constitute a reasonable suspicion. So, and the idea, and Officer Geiser will talk about his litmus test, but with reasonable suspicion is if another administrator would see the same set of facts or details or hear that same report and make a reasonable judgment that there's a suspicion of a violation of school rules or policy or of the law, or concealment, any of those categories, if that would be found reasonable, then we have cause to make that search in that case. So those search procedures, yes.
Could you give us an example of what reasonable suspicion might be? I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but
Sure.
it's something, just to provide a layer of context, to something that might denote reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion.
And so we'll get into some examples of that later too, just that have to do with some of the policy. But if we've even had situations where it was a student reported that they saw this from another student. So it could be, I saw this student had a vape out and they put it into their backpack. We've had students report of potential students bringing things into school because they showed us messages from the night before. We've had teachers who have smelled things that they thought and could particularize that to individual students. We're not going to do blanket types of searches and that sort of thing. So those are maybe some of the more frequent examples would be somebody observed something, and typically in the school setting, or somebody passed along information from outside the school setting, and we know or have a reasonable suspicion that substance or policy violation constitutes a search.
Thank you.
So when we do searches and we search items, we search those items, and we search the student by having them empty their pockets, maybe show a waistline or inside of shoes, that sort of thing. But what we don't do is do any individual searches of any persons, pat downs or anything like that, any strip searches, anything like that. We may have students pull, items of clothing to make sure that there's not anything concealed in, keeping those items inside, hidden pockets or anything like that. But we're not doing any strip searches or pat downs of students as administrators. When we do those searches, we will notify if there's time. In certain situations, if there was a threat to student safety for any reason, we may not have time all the time, but we would notify the superintendent and then conduct those searches with another employee present. If we're searching a student of the opposite sex, the goal is always to have another, and it, again, it depends on the timeliness with which that needs to happen, but we want to make sure that there's a person of the same sex that's available to search and act as a witness. Vehicle searches are conducted with the student present, and again, unless that it's an emergency. Vehicle searches, visual vehicle searches might happen just as we walk around, or we go to investigate something else that happened in the parking lot. But those visual searches are different and might give us that reasonable suspicion if we see, an empty pack of cigarettes inside a car. That might give us reasonable suspicion that we need to search that car further. If a vehicle is locked, and we've encountered that situation before, where a vehicle was locked and maybe a student refused initially to open it, then we would contact law enforcement and parents, and we get that cooperation then eventually. Searches with lockers, and this is clarified in policy, and we appreciate that there is no reasonable expectation of privacy for our lockers. And within the lockers, then there's those items, and again, we need that reasonable suspicion to dive into those items. So we can search a locker just randomly at because there is no expectation of privacy, but to search the items, the personal items within, you have to have that reasonable suspicion. And I almost included my favorite recent locker bust, which included a stack of raisins, which a student had accumulated from the food service. He had all his friends saving their raisin boxes so he could stack them in the locker. Little, that was, what's that? Yeah. We do use trained dogs in our building at random times, and we are able to step up the frequency of that depending on the availability of the trained dogs within law enforcement locally. So those trained dogs are used to identify substances that are illegal or might violate school policy. They help us identify those substances, and we have had some success with that, both in the parking lot, in the locker areas. We try not to be obtrusive to classroom instruction, but we have had students exit. We randomly choose a handful of classrooms, have students exit a classroom, and then have them leave their personal items in there, and then run the dogs through there. In all of those cases, we want to make sure that if the dog does identify something, then we have that reasonable suspicion, and we as administrators then conduct those searches. And we want to make sure that those students aren't embarrassed by the process, and so those things are done then privately once we've identified those. If we're having dogs go through the parking lot, we typically have law enforcement that's able to help us with identifying vehicles by running plates and that sort of thing, so we can do that in more of a private way. When we have our law enforcement involved, they have that other litmus test, and I'll have Officer Geisler talk about probable cause, as well as a response to, like we've had even recently, a threat of safety and making sure that everybody's safe. Again, all those, whenever we have a request from law enforcement to do an interrogation or an interview of students, and they have different rules they have to follow when a student is under the age of 18 with having parents present. I think, Officer Geisler, I'm probably taking some of your slide here, so I'll just let you run with it, okay?
So this is pretty basic without getting into the weeds on some technicalities of things. I could be here all night talking about search and seizure with you guys. Number one, if we have probable cause to arrest somebody, like a student, if they're in possession of whatever said item may be, if I arrest them, then I am able to search their person, their pockets, their backpacks, anything that might be on them or within reach of them. Threat to safety, the incident that happened earlier this year, technically it's a search, but staff and students are patted down to make sure they don't have any weapons before moving on into different areas of the school. Technically that would be a search. We don't go into pockets or anything like that, but just quick check for weapons, things of that sort. Just in situations that deem it. When it comes to talking with students, whenever I talk with a student, a parent has to be notified, even if they're a victim or a witness to something. Anytime they speak with law enforcement, the parents have to be notified. If I am talking with a student as I am suspecting them of committing a crime, a parent has to be present and a parent has to give consent in order for me to be able to talk with that student. We can do them. I don't try to traumatize students, so I try to do it in, maybe a conference room or my office, opposed to going down to an interview room down at the police department. Items found by school staff, if Mr. Conway or Mr. Gaylor searches a backpack, even though their standard's a little bit lower than mine, to be able to search something, if they locate something during a search, I can use that as evidence in my investigation. Because it was followed by the rules of the school, and they should all know the handbook. Students or the parents should know the handbook and should know the rules. Valid consent, I can ask someone if they'll let me search them or search their backpack. They can say yes, they can say no. If while searching the said item, at any time they can say, okay, you need to stop, and then I would have to stop. And then the last is a search warrant. If I obtain a search warrant, then a judge says I can go into said backpack or said car, and I can search it, and they can't pull consent or anything like that at that point because I have a signed search warrant. Without getting into the weeds, that's kind of the rough and tumble of it.
Very much.
Any questions?
Are there any
for us?
questions for Mr. Gaylor or Officer Geiser? Go ahead.
With that consent issue to parents, if they're over 18, can they waive that being, or is it all students regardless of age?
If you're over 18, parents don't have to be notified. If you're a legal adult, then parents don't need to be notified. Yep.
Diane?
To interview a student and you can't get a hold of the parents. I would imagine that would be a common problem.
We're pretty fortunate with cell phones nowadays. And the SRO cell phone number kind of makes its way through the community, and not just on a negative point. I talked with people about doing presentations or setting up a Boy Scout tour coming up here so I tell people just save this number because this is for the school resource officer. So, and fortunately, I don't think my number comes up as spam risk on caller ID. So I think people tend to answer it a little bit more often. So.
One other question I had was I assume that a search warrant is extremely rare at the high school.
I never say never, but yeah, it doesn't happen as often as it does in other areas of law enforcement. Mm-hmm.
Aaron?
Just on another note, not necessarily related to search and seizure, but more in general with the SRO, I've heard several positive anecdotal references to the SNR, our new SRO officer, in that your engagement with the kids and building relationships with them on a positive note. Can you just kind of talk through what you've been doing in that regard with the school?
Well, I believe visibility is very important when I was going through the interview process to have this position, that was a big thing for me. Visibility and prevention, building relationships with students instead of maybe acting out, having an irrational thought and acting out on it because they're upset. They can feel comfortable coming and talking to me. And in all honesty, I just enjoy it. I mean, I get paid to go talk to people, right? I mean, I'm currently in a physics argument with the physics teacher right now over something. And, you know, I just enjoy it. You know, I'm, aside from being born and raised, you know, Blue Jay Pride, Jimmy Pride, I have children in school right now, and well, next year will be all different levels: high school, middle school, and grade school. And so I act as how would I want an SRO to treat my kids. And as I say, I just enjoy it. I got the best job in the police department. That's what I keep telling people, that it's a great job. And like I said, I get paid to go talk with people, and it's wonderful.
I think that's fabulous that you have these relationships with the students. That's fabulous. I wondered about the parking lot. You know, I've been talking about this for 20 years. Are you out there during the comings and goings of the parking lot, and what is your assessment of how it goes out there?
Well, so one thing that was very important to me was to be in the grade schools. And so what I tried to do, and some workload issues have come up where I've been busy. I tried to get to a grade school every day during school drop-off. Just say hi to everybody. So unfortunately, I don't see a lot of what goes on out here, other than when there's a collision and I watch the video cameras. I don't know if there's any great answer, in all honesty, unless we did a light rail system just to drop everyone off. You know, you're always going to have congestion, and you're always going to have people who don't necessarily follow the rules of, you know, parking or fire lanes or things of that sort. But yeah, I mean, maybe if we ever did a second SRO, that would give us plenty of time, you know, give me a little bit more time to be out there and monitoring that. But yeah, for now, I just do my best.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you,
All right, thank you,
Mr.
everyone.
Gaylor, and thank you, SRO Geisler, for all that you do for the district.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hoping we get that light rail added to the capital project.
Yes. Thank you. Moving on to our superintendent's report, Dr. Luck.
Thank you. You have my written report. A number of items we'll deal with in the regular agenda, one of which is the robotics agreement. I would consider this to be, you know, really quite similar to the agreement that's in place for esports, and which we're using another entity to help support that. As Mr. Gaylor in the initial conversations outlined, it may actually make it easier from a sustainability standpoint. There's a lot of additional work that Mr. Gaylor has done, grant writing, things of that nature, that would be work through this, through James Valley Robotics Association. I feel like at this time that is the best avenue to address. This MOU would be the best opportunity to address robotics, ensure that we have an advisor to support that, and I think it's a great opportunity. From a cost standpoint, I would see it as being very similar, if not a little bit of savings long term for the district in terms of robotics and that advisor position. I apologize with my report. I think there was some sync issues where I do have what I wrote. I'm missing some of the reporting. I saw a sentence that ended right in the middle there, that all things that were updated that somehow did not sync from my computer into Drive. But we had our last facility tour of that, of our scheduled tours. Moving into the business manager and human resources generalist updates. So we will have from an interview team, Dr. Larson appointed Dan Tweeten, Gail Nelson to serve as board representatives. I have reached out to the JEA to get a representative from teachers to serve in the committee. I'll add a central office representative. I haven't talked with anybody yet about that, but we'll have a representative there. Building principal, and then I will make myself available also to lead that interview team. So we'll start with the survey off to different stakeholders to determine what are the skills, attributes, characteristics that we're looking for in our next business manager. That will help me create a profile. We'll use that profile to create questions to ensure that we're asking the right questions at an interview. Obviously, we will start with the job description and all the essential functions of business manager and HR that need to be included into that. But beyond that, we create that profile to make sure that, again, that we're finding the right person, looking for the right person. And I've also had some very preliminary discussions with the human resource consultant, considering we haven't had this split position before. Right now, the discussions are in their infancy to what a consultant might bring to us. If it goes further, it would of course come before the board, and I would ask you for support. But I think there could be value, considering that we have not had an HR department. We've had a shared HR function through our business manager. And if we add this generalist in, somebody that could come in and look at what we do, how those responsibilities are shared out, how a new person, a new generalist could come in, and how we can share those functions out and be the most efficient we can be. I think that there's some potential there to improve the situation for a new generalist. Beyond that, there would also be potential for training that would come in for that generalist position. Again, that's a position we lack now. It's hard to train when you don't have somebody that is committed to that position full-time. So I think there's some opportunities there. Just wanted to bring it up for board awareness that that's something that I'm looking at. I did update the timeline for the business manager position and the HR generalist. You can review that in my report. We're meeting tomorrow for the enrollments and facilities task force. Our focus in our last meeting was enrollment projections and how we've declined in enrollment from 25 years ago to now. Now we'll be looking at our facilities footprint, what our facility needs are, updating costs, what our capital projects plan is, and what it tells us, and that will be the discussion that we'll focus on tomorrow. I think that group has been working very well thus far, and I'm appreciative. Later on, you'll have a resignation from Lori Mecklenburg. It is certainly not ideal, but it is a situation which we discussed when approval of the hire, the late hire of the position. It was certainly hopeful that this would not come to pass, but there's other issues, and Ms. Mecklenburg has asked to be released from contract based on my initial conversations, as I've said to the board when I made the recommendation for hire, very upfront with us from the get-go about the potential for this to occur. Was not the goal, but it was the potential. And I can't say enough about my appreciation for Ms. Mecklenburg, that she's made a commitment to us. I think she's done a fantastic job. We're thankful to her. And my recommendation is to approve her resignation to begin to look for either an internal or external replacement in that kindergarten classroom. I did provide, just for your awareness, as I'm sure you've heard a lot about three-class basketball, which sometimes takes probably a greater amount of time and discussion than maybe it could or should, but it's an area people have a lot of passion about. But I've just provided, just for board awareness, so you can answer those questions that certainly come to you as people know you serve on the board and have interest in this. And I've outlined what the procedure is for the Activities Association to have discussion. And ultimately vote after a feasibility study. I provided a presentation, a list of schools that have provided either a letter of support or opposition. I would point out a few things. The focus group is not. The focus group is the group that has brought forward this concept to the Activities Association. They are not a branch of the Activities Association. They are a separate group of individuals that have interest in this concept. And I think because they serve in school capacity, sometimes that gets mixed up, and that it's believed that that the group is a part of Activities Association. They are just informing and making a recommendation to the Activities Association. And they're making recommendations. Once it goes through a feasibility study, including a financial and reviewing the concept as a whole, Activities Association board is going to make the decision and how it looks. The focus group is making, hey, this is what we think. We think a tournament would be held here. We think a tournament would be held here. We would like to do it this way on these dates. That's an Activities Association determination. And so sometimes I think the focus group recommendations can get confused with, well, if it passes, this is what's going to happen. That may or may not be the case. And I just think it's important that we recognize that these are all, at this point, just recommendations that are coming to a whole nother board that has to make that determination, and that it could very well look like something different than what's being proposed. And those are not our decisions to make. From a district standpoint, we have been, as I've shared before, agnostic on the point. It does not impact us. If you look at the list of schools that have provided either a letter of support or opposition, it follows a pretty consistent pathway. You have if you look at the largest schools would be in AA, the majority of schools like Jamestown have been agnostic. If it doesn't impact them, very few are taking a position. And that has been Jamestown's position. We have not taken a position. It does not impact us. Then there's what would be A, is the larger schools in the middle. You know, that could be what would be considered a large B now to a small A now. Those are split almost 50-50. Well, it's maybe 60-40. Slightly weighted towards formal opposition. And a lot of schools have, again, chosen to be agnostic. They just don't take a position. What's heavily weighted in support is what would be the new Class B, the smallest of districts, taking out the larger Bs, placing them in that middle division. But just wanted to share that information in the event that you would have questions on the process. And I do feel it's important that we reinforce that the focus group is not an arm of Activities Association, or hasn't been tasked with this by Activities Association. It is something they are doing and studying on their own. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Are there any questions on the superintendent's report? Any questions? Okay. And thank you for the information on that three-class system, because I think there's lots of information out there, but not always knowing where it's coming from and if it's accurate or not. So I appreciate that. If there's no other questions, we're going to move on. Nothing under old business. Under new business, we have under activities, number 1, we have one item. It's approval of a memorandum of understanding with the James Valley Robotic Association for the 2022 to 2023 school year. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail, second by Aaron. Any discussion? Any discussion? We have a motion and a second for approval of a memorandum of understanding with the James Valley Robotics Association for the 2022 to 2023 school year. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Number 2, buildings and grounds. Nothing under buildings and grounds. 3, curriculum assessment and instruction. Under A, we have this is just informational. Mr. Hagelin, if you'd come forward, please, and give us a Cognia review update.
Okay, thank you for letting me share a little bit about the Cognia accreditation process. As you're aware, last year, this fall, we were due for our 5-year review visit. Cognia notified us last spring saying that they were undergoing some changes. I think COVID impacted this a lot, but as a result, they sent us an email in April saying that our accreditations had been extended until May of 2025, and that our accreditation review would be during the 24-25 school year. So and the other part of that was more information will be coming. So we waited for the more information piece of it. This fall, Cognia and North Dakota DPI had a fall conference that outlined the new process and the new standards and so forth. So that's just a little bit of what I'll share. In the handout that Dr. Leck made available to you, like I said, the new standards there are 30 new standards. They're divided into 4 different categories, one being culture of learning, the other one leadership of learning, engagement of learning, and then growth of learning. So one of the things that we were looking forward to, or that we are looking forward to, is the fact that in the past, in our review cycles, our accreditation review visit has been at the beginning of the new cycle of the standards. So we've worked on the old standards. The team has come in and reviewed us based on the new standards. And it's still very helpful information, and they have been very flexible in what recognizing that time frame and that changing from new standards to old standards, or from old standards to new standards. But so this year, or this time around, we'll be working under the same standards as we come in for review on. Those new standards, there's a lot more of a focus on data. One of the things that that we talk about is they have a process in place now. We're going through that data, looking at data to do some analysis, coming up with some information, then synthesizing that, looking for pieces of evidence, and showing what that evidence is and so forth. And that's what the review, a big piece of that, is going to be. There are different pieces of the, besides the, all the assurances that they will check when they're here, and all those types of things that we have to submit. Oh, and that's maybe one thing I should back up and say, when they are not here, because we were notified also that all these accreditation reviews will be done virtually. So during, as part of the Cognia website, we have a workspace that's assigned, and 6 months prior to your accreditation review, that workspace opens up, and that's where you submit different pieces that they ask to look for, different pieces that you want to show as evidence of your progress in school improvement. And there are 3 specific data review pieces or data analysis that you have to go through. One of them being on student engagement or student performance data. That would be things similar to our state assessment and our interim assessments that we use. Another one would be on stakeholder feedback. So there'll be surveys going out to parents, students, staff, community members, and then also learning environment data, which has more to do with what is happening in the classrooms, observations of student engagement in the classroom in that learning environment. So we'll be working on that, and looking forward to getting that process underway. It's not necessarily something that we make a special event of. It's just something that we continually work on, and during the time of the review or prior to that review, we compile different pieces of evidence for that. So with that, I'll see if there's any questions and try to answer them.
Are there any questions for Mr. Hegland? Dan?
So you said it says the portal is open 6 months beforehand, but I suppose, is there data gathering before that?
Right. We, and it, the things that we normally do review of student assessment data and different pieces of data. And as a matter of fact, we had a meeting in November, at the beginning of November, right at the end of our first quarter. One of the pieces of that one of the activities that we do, or that we have the schools do actually, is a data review of the first quarter, where they look at their attendance data, they look at their assessment data from state assessment from last spring. We also look at various other reports with log entries, everything from, like I said, attendance to students' current academic standing and so forth. So they do a review and look at that data and look. So we keep compiling that stuff all the time, and at the end of the cycle, when we get near the end of the cycle, it's more of a manner of compiling that and bringing things together. And like I said, coming up with some of those takeaways from all those things in future plans.
Board? Thank you.
Okay. All right.
And thank you for that update.
You
We
bet.
appreciate
Thank you.
that. And we look forward to future updates as we move along with this process. Number 4, under finance, we have A. Is there a motion to approve the budget revisions? Motion by Aaron, second by Gail. Sally, did you want to just give?
Just the close grant, it's hard to get through all the federal programs, so Mr. Hagelin and I met after, to finalize all the information, what categories they should be in, so finalizing that close grant, and then already knowing about the private school needing to adjust, they did an out-of-state travel, so already knowing that, so trying to get the budget in line right away, that Title II. So, yeah, sorry I did not do an executive summary, but those are the 2 budget revisions that you're approving.
All right, thank you, Sally. So we have a motion and a second for approval of budget revisions. Any other discussion? Aaron?
There was one line item in the closed grant there where a significant amount of dollars were transferred into a 950 account, fund transfer account, unallocated. Are we anticipating additional changes? Gosh, I have my glasses. Unallocated, closed grant to, it went from 33,000 to 66,000, a $31,000 change. Are we anticipating some additional changes in the grant structure with that going forward? Line 14.
That's 0 to 5.
Okay, yeah, that is the, okay, thank you for that question. Thank you for that question. That is the birth to 5 category. And so those activities have not, have not been, there could be a future budget revision, yes, Aaron, because those activities have not been designated. We only budgeted for, because we have to put detailed descriptions in online, and there's not activities for those funds, so yes.
So the birth to 5 area, just for those that are unaware, we have allocations in different age ranges in which we have to devote funds specifically for. The birth to 5, for obvious reasons, is the one that we see the most challenge with. That is not, we have to partner with other entities. We don't have a birth to 5. It's very easy for us to allocate the dollars from kindergarten through high school. We have systems in place. We have partners for the birth to 5. And so when we can be challenged to spend all of those dollars, and we do have a requirement for birth to 5, 15% of the allocation has to be devoted to birth to 5. We can't move it from place to place. So if we don't spend it in a year, in a fiscal year, it has to be devoted only to birth to 5 in the future. So that's what this represents. So yes, a future budget revision, as we get a chance to spend those dollars, might be a future activity, but they could only be used birth to 5. And if there were ever dollars that we did not spend in birth to 5, they could not be moved at any point into any other part of the grant. It would have to be provided back to the state.
We have a motion and a second for, under Finance A, approval of budget revisions. Is there any further discussion? There being no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Under B, the general fund balance is there for, just for information. If anyone has any questions for Sally, or you can contact her later as well. Yep, go ahead, Aaron.
So just in the context of cash flow, we had identified a risk earlier in the year that, we potentially have a cash flow issue to monitor. But it looks like with these numbers here, it shows that that risk is probably not really with our district anymore, and it's not something that we're gonna realize. So is that a true assessment with these numbers here that we see?
You mean with the 35%? You mean with the carryover limits?
No, just with having the adequate cash
Oh.
to support the timing of the
Facilities, with
ESSERs.
transfers and,
Yes,
no,
yes.
that is not an issue.
And it is higher this month. I was going to make a notation, because sometimes DPI, the way they give us the funds, it ends up to be, like, we got November 1st on October 31st, so you have 2 months of DPI payment in there, too. So it is higher than normal.
And just to clarify what I had referenced earlier, my assumption was your question related to the ending fund balance limits. And that's been, just for the board's awareness, that has been waived for the year, so we don't have that requirement of 35% plus that little additional extra 50,000. But, so that isn't an issue for us anyway. But if in the event you were wondering about that ending fund balance because of ESSER, that's a non-issue also, but not your question.
Any other discussion under B, general fund balance for information? Okay. Moving on to C, monthly financial reports. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail. Is there a second? Second by Dan. Any discussion on the monthly financial reports? Any discussion? Any discussion? We have a motion and a second to approve under Finance C, monthly financial reports. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Number 5, personnel. Under A, we have approval of the resignation of Lori Mecklenburg on January 13th, 2024. Right, 2023, 2023, sorry about that, 2023, yeah. Just making sure I have it's into the next year, so 2023. I was
Somewhere
moving
down the
under.
future. I wish it was 2024.
2024, that'd be wonderful. So approval of resignation of Lori Mecklenburg on January 13th, 2023. Is there a motion? A motion by Aaron, second by Gail. Any discussion? Dr. Leck.
I just want to thank her for the service that she's provided. I think she we asked, very big favor of Ms. Mecklenburg, and she did the best that she could. It would be atypical for me to recommend a mid-year resignation, but I just want to continue to come back to the fact that this was right towards the beginning of the year. I feel like Ms. Mecklenburg bailed us out, to be perfectly frank. She's done a fantastic job, and it is not typical for us to support a mid-year resignation, but in this set of circumstances, she was very transparent about the potential for it, and it was a hire right before the beginning of school, and I thank her for everything she's done for our district.
Yes. So we have a motion and a second for approval of resignation of Lori Mecklenburg on January 13th, 2023, and we do thank her for her service and helping us out with the district. Is there any further discussion on this? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Number 6, nothing under policy and procedure, nothing under tuition. 8, nothing under other at this point. Meetings to be scheduled. We have a health insurance committee meeting on Monday, December 12th, 2022 at 3:45 p.m. in the multipurpose room in the middle school. B, regular school board meeting on Monday, December 19th, 2022 at 5:15 p.m. and we'll be back in the Thompson room for that in the middle school. We also have the school board retreat, which has been scheduled on Monday, January 9th, 2023 at 5:15 p.m. in the district office conference room. If there's any items that you'd like on future agendas, please let Dr. Leck or myself know. The monthly superintendent evaluation, Section 2, Board Relations, and Section 5, Community Relations, please complete that. And there being no further business before the board, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.